we've been lied to about January 6th since the beginning. Yes, there was violence, and the violence ought to be condemned. That's true. The violence was committed by a few fringe radicals, and those who committed the violence have and should be charged for that violence. Do you know anybody who feels otherwise? Do you know any conservative, any Republican who is justifying the fringe radicals who committed the violence? Because I don't know anybody. But what I do know is that the mainstream media and the left have been propagating a false narrative about January 6th as a diversion tactic. They don't want to talk about election integrity. They don't want to talk about the very real problems and concerns that a lot of people had about what happened in November of 2020. And so they're using what happened on January 6th as a diversion and as a way to demonize Trump voters and conservatives and any common sense person who has issues or who has concerns about election integrity. They want to paint everybody as being crazy. But let's talk about some of the lies that we have been told about January 6th, because you'll notice that every time somebody on the mainstream media or one of the Democrats talks about January 6th, they'll talk about the loss of life that happened. They'll talk about the deaths that President Trump, they'll say, could have avoided had he not incited this insurrection, their favorite word, insurrection, because it's such a scary word. It's such a word that, foments fear. It's such a word that paints anybody involved in the Washington, D.C. protests or rallies as a crazy. The 5 people that lost their lives that day, they'll say, didn't have to if President Trump had not used words that were essentially violence. We're going to talk about President Trump's words in a second. But the 5 people that lost their lives, it's a tragedy that each and every person died. It always is a tragedy when innocent people lose their lives. But the 5 people who lost their lives on January 6th are Ashley Babbitt. She, of course, died after she was shot by a Capitol Hill police officer. The left certainly doesn't want to talk about her. Then we have Kevin Greeson. He was 55 years old. He died of natural causes. He had heart disease. Benjamin Phillips also died from heart disease. He was 50 years old on January 6th. Roseanne Boyland died from a drug overdose. She was 34 years old. We have Officer Brian Sicknick, who we were told, by the way, by the mainstream media that he was beaten to death by one of the people who breached the Capitol. We were told he was bludgeoned to death by a fire extinguisher. This turned out just to be the wildest, fakest of the fake news. He actually died of natural causes. He had a seizure, or he had a stroke, I should say, a stroke disorder. He collapsed hours after, or he died hours after he collapsed the next day. So let's not pretend that the rioters, even those who broke into the Capitol, even those who committed crimes that day, they didn't kill anybody. Again, those are simply the facts, the inarguable reality of what happened that day. Now, you might be contrasting in your mind. You might be thinking, well, goodness, the left, when they claim to care about people's lives, they didn't say anything about the Black Lives Matter riots. They didn't say anything about the arson and the billions of dollars of property destruction, people's livelihoods, the dozens of people who lost their lives, the black man who was shot, but he was a police officer, a former police officer, and this was during the Black Lives Matter riots. So, of course, that was covered up. That was brushed under the rug. The hypocrisy of these people is unreal. The hypocrisy is unreal. So we've established what happened on January 6th. We've established how the left's January 6th committee, what their behavior is, how they're committing what appears to be gross violations of people's privacy. And all of this, by the way, was based on why did this happen on January 6th? Well, it happened on January 6th because that's when Congress was going to certify the Electoral College votes. That's when they were sent to Congress by the states, when the vice president is supposed to open the envelopes and basically read the results here. And the Democrats are portraying this challenge to the certification of the Electoral College as being a threat to our democracy. President Trump clearly wanted the certification to be challenged. He was advocating for, pushing quite strongly, actually. Advocating might be a tame word to describe President Trump's emotions behind this. Wanted Vice President Pence to step in and try to stop the certification of the electoral votes. And again, the Democrats paint this as a threat to our democracy, an attack on our system. But let's remember, January 6th of 2017, let's just travel back 4 years. January 6th of 2017, what happened? Well, that's the day that the Electoral College certified that President Trump had defeated Hillary Clinton. That happened in Congress. But let me read you just a snippet of this article from NBC News. It was published, as I said, on January 6th of 2017. Congress made the election of Donald Trump official on Friday, certifying the votes of the Electoral College in a formal joint session of Congress. Now listen to this. Some Democratic House members attempted to object to some states' Electoral College votes to protest the election results. But their objections went nowhere because they were unable to gain the support of a senator per the rules. So what the Democrats have tried to label as a threat to our democracy, an attack on our democracy, the idea that some conservatives, some Republicans, even the president, wanted an objection to the certification of the Electoral College votes on January 6th of 2021, that exact same thing happened 4 years prior, except it was the Democrats who were challenging the certification, and nobody on the left, nobody from the mainstream media, none of these folks shrieking about the fall of our democracy said a word when the Democrats did exactly the same thing.